So this webinar is a pretty important topic. It's important because what happens is people don't really understand how important this question is because how you answer this when it comes up will pretty much determine whether or not, in many cases, you get a job. So when this question is asked and it comes up, which is a decent percentage of the time, probably close to 50%, how you answer this question can determine whether or not you'll get an offer in many cases, assuming that you're not the only applicant, which is pretty rare. I'm going to talk about this question today, but in addition to just learning about how to answer this particular question, you're going to learn some of the most important things that employers are looking for when they're interviewing you. And real briefly, what people are looking for when they're interviewing you is they want to make sure that you really want to work there, that you like them. So that's one of the most important things. And then the second thing that they're also very concerned about, if they're a smart employer, is whether or not you'll stick around after if they hire you. So they're concerned about that. And if you really want to work there is really the main thing, because if someone doesn't really want to work there and have really good reasons for working there, then it's just going to create all sorts of problems. If a law firm hires someone, for example, a larger firm, coming from a larger firm at a smaller firm for whatever reason, and they believe that they're not going to stick around and they're only going there because that's the only thing they can get, then that's not good. So there's so many games that are part of the kind of universe of getting hired in law firms. Mentioning other practice settings is another example. So if you say you're interviewing with the government or you're interviewing in-house, that's going to make it seem like you're not going to stick around in a law firm. So there's a bunch of things I'm going to talk about today, but this is a really good topic and it's going to teach you. It's really just if you were ever to watch just like one course in interviewing or one webinar that I did about interviewing, this would be a really good one. I think you are going to learn a lot today. This is a live webinar. So at the end of the presentation, I will be taking questions and you can ask them about anything you want. So we'll take a break just for a few minutes after the presentation and then we'll come back and do questions. People ask about this question all the time. Employers will often ask you where else you're interviewing when they're talking to you. And again, like I said, it does have a major impact many times on whether or not you'll receive an offer, or sometimes if it's a callback, whether or not you'll receive a callback, how you answer the question. And there's a right way and a wrong way, but it can determine the outcome of your search, and which is unfortunate because I've seen people go in for 3 and 4 interviews or sometimes be flown out somewhere and then they go out to lunch with the firm or people from the firm and they mention this and they answer it incorrectly. And because they answer it incorrectly, they get in trouble. And this is a very important question because employers pay a lot of attention to it. They also, there's questions anytime you go into an interview and you're going to a half-hour interview with someone, say you have 4 or 5 of them, you may give all sorts of different answers to questions that they ask, and people may ask other questions. But if someone asks you this question, typically what happens is a lot of times the interviewers will all share that information or they'll share it with HR or whoever is collecting the reviews. So it's something that kind of gets around. And if people, how you answer that, if you say you're interviewing at different types of employers, people will share this information. It's probably the most widely shared topic when people share things about interviews. Unless you came in dressed horribly or something, they would talk about that. But this is really one of the most important topics. You need to be very careful about how you answer it. And just what you're going to learn today could save you, help you get more jobs than fewer if you answer this correctly. And a couple points, you don't have to answer the question. It's not asked probably more than 50% of the time. It's not usually an appropriate question for them to ask, but they do. And it's also the sort of information that you shouldn't volunteer unless you're asked, because you need to be pretty careful. It's not, you don't want to, for example, you wouldn't go on a date and tell someone you're dating 3 other people at the same time. So you need to be careful, but you shouldn't volunteer the information unless you're asked. But if you are asked the question, you aren't going to look good if you refuse to answer it. The employer doesn't want to feel that you would hide the ball when working for them. And so you need to be very upfront about that. And if you don't answer it, then people are probably not going to trust you as much as they would otherwise. And so that actually can hurt you probably more than answering the question. And I'll tell you about today ways to frame your answer to the question so you don't give the information that would hurt you. You give information that will help you without telling every piece of information, but I'll learn about that. And so it's a question that needs to be answered if it's asked, and then it really will affect how the employer views you and even how they view you after they hire you. Is the answer to this question that we remember you're interviewing with this place and that place. So it is an important question. So here's the first thing that's important. Employers are always more likely to extend offers when they believe that you're their first choice. This is a secret that I've employed for 25 years. I've been pretty good at it. And one of the things that I always do for with my candidates is I get my candidates like very excited about the firm, usually. I tell them the good things about it when they're interviewing and I get them to think that people like them if they did. And I make sure that if my candidate likes one employer more than another, I think they're a better fit than another firm. I make sure I tell the firm that candidate's first choice is that firm. And you would be amazed. I would say, if I don't say that, then the odds of somebody getting placed are probably, in terms of getting an offer, might be 20 to 50% on average. That would be after a second interview. It's a little bit higher than that. It's probably 50%, 30%. You just don't know. But it's not a super high number. But if you are a good candidate and the employer feels like you're their first choice, they're very likely to extend you an offer compared to other people because they may go out, they may interview five or six people for a position, just hypothetically. And when they interview those five or six people, some of the people may not be the best fits, but will be not enthusiastic, won't give them the impression that they're the first choice. And so the person that gives them the impression they're the first choice is usually the person that gets an offer. So this is an extremely important rule. People don't always understand. Now, you certainly want to play hard to get sometimes and that sort of thing, and you may want to negotiate. But if somebody really believes that you're their first choice, then they're much more likely to extend you an offer than the other people. And so most employers also don't want to give offers many times unless they believe that you're their first choice employer. They don't want people to say, hey, we've extended an offer to this person and they didn't accept. That doesn't look good to the attorneys that are interviewing. It makes the people that have interviewed the candidate, if they find out they extended them an offer, feel like there's something wrong with their firm. It just doesn't make the firm feel good. So people do not like to ask people or make people offers if they don't think they're going to accept. Would you ask someone to marry you if you didn't know what the answer was going to be? You might, but that's just not necessarily a good idea. Most law firms, if they're smart, and most of them are, will only extend offers if they believe that it's their first choice. And you always want to make an employer believe that you're their top choice. They absolutely, when you do that and you can convey that in so many words and connect with people and give them reasons to believe that, then you're going to do very well. I had a very funny thing happen. Actually, yesterday evening, I was doing a final interview of someone to be a recruiter here, and she's very savvy. She's in New York and has been a recruiter for 5 or 6 years, a very good recruiter. And she's got something like, I don't know, 7 offers, 8 offers from other recruiting firms. But so she went in to talk to me last night, and this was a final interview. And all she did was actually no, but she connected with me basically by saying, "This is my first choice. This is why I like this place. But I'm pretty confident that, and she's a nice person, but she might be doing that with everybody that she went on a final interview with. Who knows? Because that's a good way for her to get the most offers to compare to things. I don't know, but that's the best interviewers will do that. They will give every employer the belief that their first choice if they want to move the ball forward. They'll say things that they like about them and all sorts of stuff. I had the funniest thing happen when I was in law school. And this may come up later in this presentation, but I'll tell it right now. There was a small firm in, I don't know, South Carolina, like in a small town or something. It was like 4 attorneys, and they were interviewing people to be summer associates. And there was a guy interviewing for that summer associate role, and myself. I don't know why we were interviewing this. It was just you would get a certain number of interview slots, and you would not always know the firm you're going to be with. But this particular guy interviewing with this firm was a very smart, really good student, very personable. And so he went into this four-person firm and was just, I could hear him because I was sitting outside the interview room and just talking about how much he really wanted to work at a small firm and how all these different things about why he wanted to be there and how this is the ultimate job and how he's going to get the best experience and it's going to be collegial. And he ended up going to Latham and Watkins in New York, where I think he's a partner now, or he became a partner there at another firm. And so that wasn't what he wanted to do was all, but he made sure he got that job. And so this is what people are able to do. And when they do that, and this is what the best attorneys do when they go on interviews. They don't, why would you give someone the impression that you don't want to work there when you don't even have all the information, or need to make the person feel like you really like it, and I'm hearing what I want to hear, and that sort of thing, and that can help you quite a lot. So that's something to think about. But for the most part, employers will often try to convince people to work there after they received an offer. They'll be nice and answer questions and things, and sometimes they will call and proactively make a pitch to the person before making the offer and then or after making the offer. But for the most part, they don't do that. They want to believe that if they give you an offer, you're going to choose them, and they want to believe that you're their first choice. And it's going to influence everything that happens during the process. And the majority of time, if they believe that's going to be something that's extremely important about whether or not the offer is extended, if you get a job based on if they believe that. And before we get into this a little bit more, I want to make you understand a couple of things that are interesting about offers being extended and what the employer believes. So there's all sorts of moves that people can make. They can move from a large firm to a small firm. They can move from the small firm to a large firm. They can move from a big city to a small city. They can move to a small city to a big city. So you can think of all these different kind of combinations of movements that people can make. And so each one of those moves, people have to have very good reasons a lot of times to make the firm feel that they're the best choice. Say you want to move to a larger firm. You say, I really want to work on more sophisticated matters. It's always been my goal to work in a firm like this. If you hire me, I'm going to do everything I can to make it work. This is why I like this kind of work. This is what I've dedicated my career to, and I'm trying to get better and better. So people say things like that, and it's very common for attorneys to move from smaller firms to larger firms. And I'll talk a lot more about that today as well. But it's the same thing. An attorney from a huge law firm wants to take a pay cut and make one. I had a guy recently that moved from a big firm in New York to a firm in the suburbs, and he took a his pay went down by three times. So I think he was making 450 and he went to make 150, but he had really good reasons for doing that. He wanted to be a partner in a smaller firm. He wanted to be closer to home so he could have more time with his family, was on the train all the time. He wanted to not work as many hours. He wanted to have the ability to become a partner and bring in business. So he was able to convince a smaller firm, which normally you would think probably wouldn't be that interested in someone like him because of the fact that he had really good reasons for wanting to work there. So this is what people have to do if they're trying to work in a larger firm or a smaller firm. So there's all sorts of things and ways to explain it. As I said earlier, an employer wants to believe that when you're interviewing someplace that you're choosing them, that there's something special about them that you like. And the employer really wants to believe you're their first choice, and it's going to influence how they evaluate you during the process, and the majority of time it is going to determine whether or not an offer is extended. And how you justify that is also the firms that you're interviewing will have a lot to do with whether or not you get an offer. And if a law firm, like I said earlier, if a law firm believes that you're their first choice, they also want to believe that if they do make you an offer, that you're going to stay there with them after you join. And they want to understand like why they're the best fit for you among other things you could be looking at. They don't want to make a mistake hiring you. And one of the important things about interviewing too to understand, and this is something that I see all the time, and I wasn't good at it when I was younger, but if you hire people and those people are not likely to stick around, or those people have a bad attitude, or those people believe they can go to a better firm, or these people believe that they're better than your firm because they've better experience, or they should be making more money, or they want to work in a different type of environment, or they want to work in a different part of the city or in a different state, then if you were an employer, like why would you want to hire someone that it's likely for that not to work out? You wouldn't. And so employers have to be very careful. Now, sometimes they will make hiring decisions just because they need someone immediately and they can't find anybody. But the majority of successful employers are very good at hiring people that are likely to stick around because if people leave, then that undermines the entire firm. It's just not good. If you were an employer and you hire an attorney and that employer is not someone that's likely to stick around, what happens is someone starts a firm and if they're not happy, they start looking for jobs immediately. Or if it's not the job they wanted, they start looking for jobs immediately. And then they're never really fully engaged with the employer while they're there. Or maybe they start looking for a job after 3 months or 6 months. It's just the way they are. They're not going to be fully engaged for when they're thinking about finding a job. And I'm sure anybody that's has any experience looking for a job while you're employed knows that at some point people check out and they're not doing the work at the level they're capable of doing and working as hard as they're capable of doing. So people check out, and then when they check out and they ultimately leave, that kind of undermines all the people that are there in some cases, depending on the size of the employer, because it makes people think that someone can go somewhere else and do better, or there's something wrong with that employer. And so employers want people to stick around. And the majority of employers 95% of them are not your legal employers, are not your am law size law firms. They're smaller firms where culture and the people there how people feel about their employer is much more important a lot of times than the major firms. And so law firms are evaluating you based on your qualifications, but also how you respond to this question. And a good attorney, by the way, is always capable of thinking on their feet, of giving good answers, of selling themselves well, and putting themselves in the best light. So it's very important how you answer this question. And because what employers are really trying to do is they're trying to understand your commitment, whether, what you're interested in, and they want to feel confident that if you're choosing to go to work there, that you're choosing them for the right reasons. And so being able to justify these interviews is going to have a major effect. So the first thing I said earlier is that the employer must believe you're their first choice. And I'll tell you a quick story. It's actually almost more true today than it was back then. It's a fun story. But I formerly worked in the missions office at the University of Chicago in Los Angeles. So I was in charge of missions and supervising other admissions people in Los Angeles. And in that position, my responsibility was to ensure that people that were applying were interviewed by different alumni and then all over LA. So all the applicants were coming in LA. And then if the alumni couldn't interview them, then I would interview them. But I interviewed a lot of people. And I never made that job. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination saying that I was working in the admissions office making admissions decisions. All I did was put together reports on everyone I spoke with and then made sure that the other representatives submitted their reports. And I usually have to speak to sometimes a tremendous number of people because it was hard rounding everyone up for this. But in these reports, I would express if I liked the person or not, and maybe they cared some way. But in general, they would make decisions on their own. But this Chicago is a good school. I don't know what it's ranked, but it's usually a top 10 school. And so when I'd speak with high school students about this, and I'd ask them why they were interested in going to the school. And usually I got a pretty good sense of how serious and motivated each person was because I had an understanding kind of the types of students who go there and fit in. It's not going to Harvard or something. It's much different in terms of the student body. They tend not to be as well-rounded. They tend to be more academic, and there's just a certain type of person that gets in there. So I had a framework for kind of evaluating that, and I believed that, and I think I was right, that the ones that would do well there were the ones that had the most compelling reasons for wanting to attend. And so their answers would have, when I asked them about the school, they would act like they were very interested in it, and they wouldn't just want to go to the school for any particular reason or to get into a good school. They would really want to go there and they would understand what the school was about. And so I had to decide what I thought was important was deciding who was really interested in going there because obviously of a school. The other thing too is like what this is actually a very interesting point, and I should have brought this up earlier. But universities are like in US News and World Report, they're evaluated based on what's called yield. And yield means that the percentage of offers that the school makes that are accepted. So if a school makes like 100 offers to go there, 100 admits, like what is the percentage of people that ultimately choose to go there? It's like that in law schools. Like in law schools, if gets a offer to go to Yale Law School and gets into Yale Law School, their odds of attending that are pretty good. They're usually going to be 80+%, I'm assuming. They may want to go to places that don't give as much money that give more money, but people that get into Yale generally go there. And Chicago right now has a very high yield rate. I think it's 86 or 87%. I'll tell you about how they do that in a minute because it's very interesting. But so some schools they take that very seriously. So I was always trying to evaluate people who wanted to go there. And most people that were applying to the school, at least back then, I haven't done this in a long time, but most of those people that were applying to the school were also applying to the best schools like Princeton, Yale, and other types of highly ranked schools. And most of those students that were applying to Chicago or whatever the school was had a lot of options available to them. And so my questions were always like, why would someone want to go to the University of Chicago as opposed to Stanford? They're completely different schools. And so I'd want to understand like why were they interested in the school? And the problem with Chicago, or it's I think now, I mean it's might be ranked. I don't even know what it's ranked, but maybe I think it's ranked probably because my daughter goes there. I think it's probably in the top five. I don't know, but it's a highly ranked school, but it's certainly not number one. It's not whatever MIT or whatever number one is right now, but it's not number one. You'd have to figure out why someone would want to go that could go to a number one, two, or three school or four. Why would they would want to go to someone that was seven, eight, or five, six, whatever, nine, 10? Why would they want to go to that school? And yeah. And so if you are interviewing, like for example, if I was a Harvard interviewer, then I would assume that anybody that I interviewed with that got in there would probably want to go there. Maybe they would go to Yale, but they would probably want to go there. And so students typically will want to go to the best school that they get into. It's just how it works most of the time, not for everybody. But I knew that the people that would apply to Chicago would also be applying to other top schools. So I always wanted to understand why was someone interested and what were their motivations for wanting to go there. And when it's the same thing employers are looking for. So employers are trying to see why does this person why is this person talking to us? Does this person really want to go work here? It's just the same thing with colleges. Why is this person applying to us? Do they really want to go here? And so people are trying to understand that. If you're an employer and you don't pay as much as other employers, they'll come out right and say it. They'll say, hey, we don't have the best pay, we have the best hours, we have the best collegiality, or people stay here the longest. And they'll have all these sort of different rules for how they market themselves to, or how they get people to like them and want to work there because they know they're not offering something. So you'll have to come out and say, yes, this is exactly what I want. I want a smaller firm with better hours. And so you'll hear that. Almost everybody watching this is probably going to hear that at some point in their career. We don't pay as much, but this is what's good about us. And this is just how employers market themselves. And an example would be if you're interviewing with Google and also a small 15-person computer firm, the smaller firm is probably going to pay half of what Google pays. And so most people would presume that you'd rather go to Google. And there's a huge compensation and prestige difference. And so if you're the 15-person computer firm, you tell them you're interviewing with Google, they may wonder, would this person actually prefer to go work here? That's assuming all their things are equal and there wasn't stock options and different things. But most people would assume that the small firm wasn't their first choice. And same thing with Google. So if Google finds out you're interviewing with a very small computer firm, they may assume that you're only doing that because other big companies like Facebook and everything aren't interviewing you. So they may think that Google's a reach for you and believe that maybe that they're doing you a favor considering maybe there's something they don't know about you that doesn't make you marketable. And so you always need to put yourself in the shoes of the person who's like thinking about hiring you. They want to think that this person really wants to go there. There's reasons, this person's in demand. And so what they think about what your options are going to have a lot to do with how they actually evaluate you to hire you and whether or not they believe what they believe will whether or not will get you hired. There's another kind of fun thing that I do. This is just like a recruiter secret, but it's something that's been very effective to me. But a lot of times, if I'm talking to a firm, and I tell a firm all of a sudden that all these great firms or other firms are interested in this person, and there's almost like a feeding frenzy, and I'm trying to hold these firms off to because I think this firm's a really good fit for them that the person's talking to, and this person's really marketable in demand. Like a lot of times, if you're sitting in a law firm and you're like an HR person or you're a partner or whatever, you don't know how marketable someone is in the market. And so if they think you're extremely marketable, like they're like, oh, this is something really good. We better grab this person and get them in here. And we're really lucky that we're getting them compared to other places. That's what law firms, that's what they like to think. They like to think that people are very marketable and that they're really lucky that they got this person. It doesn't matter if it's a large firm or a small firm. So people believing that a lot of people want you in the market and then you're their first choice is actually really important. It's also, by the way, something that the best lawyers do. So the best lawyers will always position themselves as really in demand, and it's hard to get them to represent you if you're a client and all this sort of thing. So that's what the best lawyers do, marketing themselves to people to hire them. And then in addition to lawyers doing that, then you should do that when you're marketing yourself to work somewhere. Anytime you try to introduce like scarcity or demand and make people think that a lot of people really want you, then that helps you. And so what I would ask myself whether these students really wanted to go to Chicago when I would interview them. And that was important because I felt like if I put in a good word for this person, I didn't want to waste it if it was someone that didn't accept the offer to go there. And regardless of there's lots and lots of strong people out there, most really good schools can the best ones, whether it's Harvard or Stanford or Yale or whatever it is, they could fill their entire classes with people that have the top grades and you went to the best schools. But a lot of times, if there's a fit and so forth, that can actually go much farther. So in admissions, it's very common and it's extremely common right now for colleges in particular they're much, much more likely to admit people when they believe it's their first choice. It's extremely important. And the reason is because what I talked about earlier, the application yield. So if your school is ranked based on the number of people that you make offers to go to work there, that to go to school there that accept, and that makes your ranking higher, then you have to be very good at, give me 1 second, sorry here. You have to be very good at making sure if the person wants to attend there, it's fun. So how do they do that now? So what schools do, these are like hidden tools that they use, which a lot of people don't understand. So schools will do things like they will have early admission. So early admission means they'll take a lot of their class from early admission applicants. And so early admission applicants will be people that if they're admitted, they say they're absolutely going to go there. They'll do that. And then they'll take people from alumni. That's very common. Like alumni that they think that the alumni are really close to the school, or they'll take people that have gone to summer programs there, which means that they really want to go there. So they'll do all these things to try to understand like who wants to go there. And then they'll also a lot of times encourage a lot of applicants from people, and those people may not always want to go, may not always be the kind of people that are admitted, but they'll get as many applicants coming in the door, and then that will increase their yield rate. So there's all sorts of tricks that schools use. I don't know. These are just tools that the kind of all the top schools use, but it's very interesting. So people want to bring in people that want to go there. And so when I would recommend people, I wanted to feel confident. I wanted to be able to say it was their first choice. I wanted to explain why the person's their first choice. And then I wanted to have reasons. So it's not just enough for you to say, this place is my first choice. You have to be able, people have to believe it's your first choice because of all these different reasons you can give, and they have to be believable. And then the law firm also needs to believe that you're like the sort of person that would do well there. You have to, if you go into a place, you're going to get a very quick understanding of what the culture of the firm is like, what the people there are like, and you'll have to hopefully click with that, and people will like that. And but all these sorts of things make a big difference. And most employers are receiving lots and lots of applicants from very highly qualified people, and most applications to if a law firm's receiving, I don't know what they might receive for an opening. Some law firms might receive 10 applicants, five, but most of them receive more than that, especially in large cities. That they're typically not only evaluating that, but they're also looking at you if you're likely to accept an offer. So I used to have a law firm. I haven't had 4 or 5 years ago when I stopped having a law firm, but I used to have a law firm, and I would have openings and to work in this law firm, and I would get applicants. But if I got someone that was making 3 times what I would pay, I obviously wouldn't pay attention to it, or had really good qualifications. There's no reason they would want to come to work at a 3 or 4 person attorney law firm or 3 or 4 attorney law firm when they're working at a 1,000 person attorney law firm. And so those are, I just wouldn't even look at, I wouldn't call those people in. And so if if an employer doesn't think you're going to work for them, then they're not, why would they speak to you? They don't want to spend the time and energy, and they want people that are going to want to work there. And then sometimes if the employer gets an impression that if you want to go someplace that's better than them, that you don't have specific reasons for going there, then they're not going to let that either. And they often, people will give just the crappiest reasons when they go in for interviews about why they want to work someplace. And the employers will pick up on that. You need to have really good reasons, and those reasons should be well thought out. And if they're not, then that's going to create issues. And I've seen this, like I've talked about earlier, attorneys that want to move to smaller firms. A lot of times people are under the impression that a small firm is really would really want them, that they're going to get, the firm's going to be really interested in them because their qualifications are so good. And if the attorney's coming from, like I said, a much better law firm, the smaller law firm will not interview them. And it's funny because I do this all the time. I'll have candidates that are interested in, for example, going from a major firm, and they may actually even want to go to a smaller law firm. But when they apply to smaller law firms, the smaller law firms will ignore their applications. They literally will not pay attention to them because they will feel like that the person doesn't want to work there. And I had a funny thing happen. It was it was a long time, it was years ago, like a couple decades ago, but I had a candidate that wanted to work in San Diego and had the most stellar credentials you can imagine. He'd been the top of his class, I think, at Harvard Law School and some other stuff. And then he was a really good law firm, I think, like one of the top 2 or 3 best law firms in New York, and just a really great background. And he wanted to move to San Diego. And so in San Diego at the time, you had some kind of local California firms, Cooley and Brobeck, and it was no longer in existence, and some branch offices or sleepy of national law firms. And I applied him to 10 or 15 of these firms, and you would have thought that one look at these guys' resume and these firms would have gone crazy and just been very excited to have him. And the opposite happened. There was absolutely no response. And none of the law firms would respond, which I'll tell you how funny that was, is because at the time, the type of corporate attorney this guy was, there was just massive demand in the market for someone like him. So had I sent them someone from, say, Los Angeles, that maybe had gone to a top 25 law school and done okay there and was working at a middle market firm, like not even an Am Law 100 law firm, almost every one of those firms would have wanted to interview them because there was so much demand. But what happened was the opposite here. So San Diego is not like a hub of corporate law activity, never has been. This guy's parents just have happened to move there, and so that's why he wanted to work there. But give me 1 second here, sorry. But yeah, so he was trying to get a job there. A couple weeks went by and nothing happened. And I couldn't believe it because in the same period of time, I was getting people interviews in San Diego that were not from as good of firms, that didn't have as good of experience, that didn't have the law school credentials and so forth. And so what I did is I started calling all of the firms after I'd sent the resume and all this information and explaining to them that this guy really was interested in them and this is someplace he wanted to interview with and he had these are the reasons he liked them. And so I looked up the firm and I talked to him about each of them. And so that was something that worked. And it worked because I explained to the firms he's very selective, he knows what he's looking for. And so then all the firms, most of them, not all of them, but probably 10 out of 15 decided to interview him. And so even then, when they interviewed him, they still weren't sure he was the first choice. And so the one that ultimately he went to work with was his first choice. And I think he was able to, he didn't get a lot, he didn't get offers from each of these places. The ones that ultimately made him offer was the one that believed he wanted to work there. So someone coming from a larger firm to a smaller law firm, the smaller law firm often won't respond at all because they don't think the person wants to work there. And just from the standpoint of how would you feel? So if say you went to, I don't know, like a third or fourth tier law school and you had a small law firm and you hired all of a sudden some superstar attorney from, I don't know, Stanford Law School to work for you and to work in your firm. The attorneys from that all went to these third and fourth tier law school wouldn't feel that great about themselves. They would feel like they're around someone that wanted to be superior to them or thought they were better than them and stuff. And they wouldn't necessarily warm up to that person and they might not feel good about themselves. And so people do not like to spend time with generally with people that think they're better than them or that they just believe are better than them. If you wouldn't want a bunch of friends that were, 10 times me, you might, but I personally wouldn't be comfortable spending all my time hanging out with billionaires. I just wouldn't feel good about myself with their spending habits and art and houses and just whatever. Travel, it wouldn't make me feel good about myself being friends with them. That's how attorneys are too. Attorneys don't necessarily, and firms don't necessarily want to be around people that think they're better than them. And so that's an idea about going to smaller firms. And then, of course, you have the idea of larger firms. And again, an example would be if you went to a public school, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with a public school, but you went into some other profession like medicine or something, and a lot of people that you went to the school with might not have done that great and as well as you did in their lives because you're an attorney or you're no longer the same person. And so those people wouldn't feel as comfortable around you anymore. Now, I had that happen. I had gone to a public school outside Detroit for a long time, and those people most of them didn't leave, and not necessarily they wouldn't. I was comfortable being friends with them, but of course, it's just why would just it's different. So people don't typically want to be around other people that don't make them feel good about themselves, and if they're reminded of their inadequacies then that's even more problematical. So sometimes people think, oh, this person would be very lucky to be my friend but people don't want to be reminded of their inadequacies. And so that's an example of your past friends. If you became a lawyer and now you're going back and meeting people, they may not be as comfortable. You may be comfortable, but they may not be as comfortable around you. And so it's people also, it's interesting, but this is the truth. People often don't marry outside their social class. This can create difficulty, just issues because one family thinks they're better than the other. So they feel like that person should not have married into my family because my family's better. I had that dynamic with my own parents. And yeah, so that doesn't work. And so no one likes being around others who remind them of their inadequacies. And employers are the same. My mother's father owned a hardware store, and that's what he did. But then my mother went to a state school like Michigan State, and then my dad went to Harvard and Michigan Law School and all this stuff. And yeah, and then his father was a famous journalist, and his father was a governor of Kansas, and his father it just goes on and on. And so my mom always felt outside of that and never good about herself. And this just completely different families. And so that people don't like that and it can destroy lives. Not just, but it can create problems marriages and relationships. And so that dynamic, just as it doesn't always work, it certainly can work in marriages and things, but it doesn't always work. And if it doesn't work, then it's not good for employers and either. And law firms are very careful about saving face. If they take another offer over if a law firm, if the person takes another offer over theirs, that makes that law firm look bad in the eyes of the law firm, but also in the eyes of and also the eyes of the attorneys there that may have interviewed people. I had something interesting happen too as well. I probably shouldn't tell this story, but I'm going to tell it anyway. But I had a law firm, a candidate, and she interviewed with a really good, it was a kind of a middle market law firm in Los Angeles years ago. And she'd gotten a couple of different interviews and was very personal and got a couple of different offers. This middle market law firm thought it was like punching at the same level of these like major AmLaw 100 law firms, and the attorneys held themselves out like that, but they weren't the same caliber as attorneys in terms of their backgrounds, and they didn't represent as large clients. And so she got an offer from this middle market firm and didn't take it. And when she didn't take it, that person in the recruiting role at that firm was very angry with me for a couple of years and wasn't interviewing my candidates because she felt like I should have made sure that person took her offer. And that was my job as a recruiter, was to really close that. And even though it wasn't my job, and the law firm should have gotten a better sense of that when they were interviewing her, and I never gave the law firm the impression it was her first choice. But anyway, that recruiting coordinator left. But that was, and then the law firm started hiring my people again. But that was something that really taught me how important it is for law firms to feel like someone's their first choice. And if the person doesn't take an offer, how it doesn't make the law firm feel good about themselves. Again, if you don't accept an offer, it makes the law firm feel that and doesn't make them look good. So almost all the time, people will, and it's not all the time, but when people are doing job searches, and it certainly depends on the practice area, the location, all these different things. But most of the time, most attorneys get don't get more than one offer. Now, a lot of them do. Some of them get five offers, some of them get six, a lot of them get two. But the majority, over 50% of attorneys, when they're doing a job search, whether it's through me or on their own or however they do it, most of them usually don't get more than one offer. And I think that happens because they go in some places and they click and they make that law firm feel like they're a really good fit for them and that they like them and all these different things. And so that's the one that they get. And so law firms, again, take a rejection fairly seriously. And usually one of the question of who you're interviewing with, it's typically not, they don't ask it like right out of the gate. It's usually something, it often comes up in the second interviews. Sometimes it'll come up in the third interviews, but the employer really needs to know that you're their first choice. So a lot of times what a smart attorney will do too is that you'll start, if you're really good at asking questions and listening, people will tell you what they like about the firm when you're interviewing them. And then when you're reviewing their materials, like you should be reviewing them very carefully before you go in for an interview. You should review the website. You should review the bios of people. And then one of the biggest pieces of advice that I give all my candidates when I'm doing interview prep, and I try to do prep every one of my candidates that gets an interview, I try to prepare them for do interview prep. For whatever reason, some don't do it, and that's fine. But the majority of ones that do, I have a very good closing rate, meaning a high percentage of them end up getting offers. It's pretty high. I would say 80%, maybe 80% usually, something like that. And yeah, and then without the interview prep, it's like maybe 10%, 15, 20. I don't know why it's so much lower, but because people don't think about this stuff. But one of the things that is really important. And if you do this before interviews, if you do this before client pitches, it can make a huge difference. And it's what I think is the most important thing. And it's this thing I came up with that I started teaching people because I started doing it just instinctively when I was doing certain things. But when you're going on an interview, you should just take out a piece of paper and review the website and just write down all the things that you really like about this firm. Like, what is it that you like about that? And you try to figure out, like, how does that fit in with the kind of attorney you want to be and all these different things. And you just brainstorm, even if you literally just looking at things for 15 to 20 minutes and then reading Glassdoor reviews, whatever you're doing, it's important. And so if you do that and you write down these reasons that you like the firm, that's helpful. And then in addition to doing that, and writing down these reasons you like the firm, then you look at the bios of the people that you've spoken to. So that can be very helpful too. So looking at the bios and seeing what the bios say about the people and then writing down what you like about each individual person, because then you can connect with them. And so you write down all those things. And so that helps you being able to say what you like about the firm and then to do that right when you walk in the door if it comes up and to try to connect things. And then when you talk to people, asking them what they like about the firm and then trying to come up with reasons that make sense that you like them. If you are able to do that and you're doing it effectively, then it does make it much more likely you'll get offers. And when an employer believes you're their first choice for whatever reason, and they hear that you're interviewing with a bunch of people, if they ask you, it can actually help you. And it can create a sense of urgency, meaning if there's all these people interviewing them and they're going to get all these other offers, it shows you're in demand. Again, if they feel you're the top choice and they believe they're top choice, then you're going to be in really good shape. So anybody that's interviewing, like the 15-person computer firm I gave you earlier, that example, if anybody could probably quite easily get an offer from this firm, but they would have to really understand, like, what do they need to do? How do you play your cards? And so what you need to do is you would need to walk in there and convince the firm you really wanted to work there. You might have known someone there in the past, and that person or someone who's currently there. And you talk about what that person said. We would talk about the exact type of work that that company's doing that matches what you want to do, that it's more focused than you would get at Google, or that it gives you more freedom to be creative. I don't know. Maybe the office is right across the street for your house, and maybe you want to work in a more collegial atmosphere. Maybe there's stock options and all these things, and maybe they're working on some incredibly important project. And so you need the arsenal at your disposal to give the employer compelling reasons to want to hire you. And so you have to be able to explain why you're a strong fit, why you want to work there, all these sorts of things. And the better your case, the more comfortable the employer's going to feel moving forward. There's an interesting story, and it's recent. It's with Elon Musk and his XAI, which is his AI program, and then there's Facebook, and there's, I don't know, Anthropic and all these other AI companies. And so Musk's AI company has been hiring the best people that specialize in this AI, and the people are making a lot of money. There's not a lot of people in the world that are versed and know how to whatever this AI work that is done, programming and things. There's not a lot of people that know how to do it. And so those people that know how to do it, that have gotten PhDs in this from top schools and artificial intelligence and stuff, are making a lot of money. Some of them are getting like offers of 25 million, 50 million a year. It's just absolutely amazing. But what even more amazing is, so this XAI is not paying as much as companies by a lot less in many cases than Facebook and ChatGPT and things are paying. And so they are getting actually people that want to go to work there more. And the people want to go to work there more because they believe in Musk, they believe in his vision, they believe he's all these things that he's done to change space flight, and then which I guess the XI is actually part of. It's funny, SpaceX now, but all these different things that he's done that's actually much more inspiring to them. So the people that are going in there they're actually interviewing and trying to get jobs that pay millions of dollars less than they might make at one of these other companies because they believe in the mission of the company and they believe in Musk and all these things. And so it's interesting to me that you have that. Sometimes people even try to get into a lower pay job because they believe in the founder, they believe in the work that they're doing, or they believe in the mission and things. So again, if you are able to play your cards right with a 15-person computer firm, then they may look at you viewing as, if you really give them the impression that you really want to work there, they may believe that Google is interviewing you. That's a good verification of your market value. Instead of them being intimidated, they'll believe that's good proof that you're in demand. And so that can straighten your candidacy. And a small firm really wants to believe that you're going to choose them over Google because they don't want to make you an offer if you're just going to Google. And if you do go to them as opposed to Google, that makes the computer firm feel good. It makes all the employees there feel good that look, here's someone that chose to come here over Google. They'll use that as a place that it's a great place to work. We've got all these people. We've got people that chose to come to work here other than Google. And so that helps everyone. And so it's the same thing that I did when I was interviewing people. I'd understand if they were interested in the school. I'd get pretty good indication of that. If you can look at someone that has really good qualifications, perfect SAT score, athletics, and all this different stuff, then you'll know that person has their choice of schools. And so the credentials show they're competitive. But in my case, like if I knew my school was the only top school they were applying to and they had really good reasons for wanting to go there, that would make them someone that you'd want to recommend. And then even if a student was applying to a lot of really good schools, which there's no reason they shouldn't, I could still understand whether or not that person wanted to attend by things like if their children, I mean, their parents went there, or they again summer school, or they worked for a professor there, or someone that had been a professor there, someone that had gone there, or some of the work of some professor there that they followed and liked. And so the point is that employers need to have very clear signals that for whatever reason they're your preference. And so if they do believe that, then they're gonna that's gonna help you. People feel good when they hire people that really want to work there, when they make offers to people that really want to work there. They don't feel as good when they don't. So if someone really wants to work there, that makes the employer feel good. And so you need to learn how to do that during the interview stage. Now, you don't always necessarily do that. I told you this presentation is about a lot more than just talking about it at their interviews. It's really making people believe that you want to work someplace when you're going into interview. And it's just extremely important because if the employer thinks you really want to work there, they're more likely to make you an offer than other people that might have better qualifications. Making it look like you're their first choice, packaging yourself correctly. And then if you do that well, then you're going to be much more successful than people that don't. And this, by the way, is one of the biggest mistakes. And yeah, I'm going to say something that's not very nice, but I'm going to say it anyway. You have different types of people, but sometimes people, and a lot of times it's not all the time, but it's more than not. So you'll have a lot of first generation attorneys that may have come out of their parents may have worked in fast food or in factories or whatever. And so these people went to college and then they become attorneys. And they don't always think about things in the proper way. Because if you're applying to McDonald's, you're just applying because you want to get paid and you're going to do the work. If you work in a factory, you're applying because you want to get paid and do the work. And so certain jobs you just do and you get paid and you might not necessarily enjoy it, but that's what it is. And that's a lot of these kind of working jobs that would be called blue collar, I guess. And it's not like that for all of them, but it is for that a lot of them. So people that are taking blue collar jobs are just showing up and like, I can do the work, pay me. But in the legal profession and a lot of professional type jobs, it's not just about being able to do the work. It's about really wanting to do the type of work that employer has with the type of people that are there and as something that could be that you'll do for your entire career. That's what it's about. So you have to convince people of that. It's not just about showing up to do the work. So the thing that's unfortunate that happens a lot of times with the candidates don't that come out of certain backgrounds is they will go into interviews and they will act like I'm here to do the work and they won't think about all this connection and all these things they need to do to show that they're a good fit and selling themselves. And this ability to sell yourself is incredibly important, not just for getting jobs, but when you're able to get clients. It's all about selling yourself. And if you can sell yourself, then you'll get clients. So people need to learn how to sell themselves and how to convince clients that they're the best choice for the client, that they really like the client, that they really want to help the client. That's what it's funny when I talk to these major rainmaker clients, they will go out and I'm sorry, major rainmaker attorneys, they will go out and be able to convince clients that they really like them, that they really understand their problems, that they're the perfect attorney for them, that they've done all these things, and that they can help them. And attorneys that are very good at that will typically get the most clients. And that's one of the leading things that the best attorneys do is they go out and they connect with people and they make them feel like they understand them, that they're going to be the best, the absolute best fit for them, and that sort of thing. Yeah. All right. So how do you explain other interviews? This is the meat and potatoes of this presentation. So there are a bunch of different scenarios about what happens, and if you've prepared and you understand this, but here are the scenarios. So the first one is you may not be interviewing with any other employers. The next one is you're interviewing with less prestigious employers, or you're interviewing with a mix of more prestigious employers and less prestigious employers. Those are just some potential scenarios. So if you're not interviewing with any other employers, that's actually the easiest one. And it'd be great if you could say that for all of your interviews. But there's no benefit in you people believing that you have all these options. If you are not interviewing with the employers, it's actually a good thing to say. It doesn't, you don't have to create this option, the idea that you have a lot of options. If you're in school, you tell people, I'm just started applying to places. If this is your only interview so far, it can be, you can say, I just started applying. This is the first interview I've had, or it matters. But employers don't want to feel like there's something wrong with you. They don't want to believe that you're someone without options. So how do you explain that situation exactly? And so if you're interviewing laterally and you're already employed interviewing somewhere, it's actually a good idea often to say you're not interviewing with anybody else. And having one interview can actually help you. And so how do you explain that? First, you should say that I wasn't actively looking for a position. And so I'm not just looking for a job. I'm looking for speaking with this employer because this is exactly the type of place I want to work. It's a perfect fit for what I'm interested in. And so if the employer believes that they're a really good match for you, then they're much more likely to bring you in. And if you look like you're not applying to a lot of other places, you saw this job and you really wanted to reach out because this is the exact type of work you're interested in, and I wouldn't be leaving otherwise. And law firms love to hear that. And telling a firm you're interviewing with them can be very persuasive, and people like that because it shows that you're committed, that you want to work in this type of employer, and they like that. It can make it look like you're very loyal to your current employer. So if you say you're only interviewing one place and it doesn't appear that you're really doing this kind of all-out search for a new position, it suggests that you're very selective, that this firm matches the kind of work you want to do and whatever it is about the firm. And so people like that. And it seems like that employer would be a place that hopefully, if you were to get an offer, that you might go to work at. So that's actually very good. It can position you as someone who evaluates the fit with the firm over convenience. And then it also puts the employer in a position where they don't think you're talking to a lot of other people and you like them. So if they make you an offer, which is, again, I told you one of the most important things, that you're likely to accept it. There's nothing wrong with having only one interview, and it can reverse, and it also will make them often take you much more seriously because they'll feel like they're not wasting their time, and if they really believe that you're interested in them. And so when you appear focused on them, it's going to lower their risk of extending an offer. Again, people don't like to make offers with people that are competing with a lot of different offers. And the more confident they feel about you accepting, the more attractive of a candidate you're going to be. It also will put them in a position where they're not going to think if you don't accept the offer that you're going to go somewhere over them. If someone stays with their existing firm and it doesn't go to another firm right away, that's much better than if you were to take offers other places. The employer then will feel secure about extending you an offer. And I told you earlier that they don't want to lose face if you go to a competitor. The other option could be happening is you're interviewing with less prestigious employers than that employer. So there's actually strong benefits to that as well. It can work in your favor, and especially if that employer thinks they're more prestigious. And if you're interviewing with, say, you're interviewing with, I don't know, three firms, and one of them is much more prestigious than the other two, then that law firm that's interviewing you is going to feel like if they do make you an offer, that you're much more likely to accept than any of the other employers that may not be as prestigious. And so, again, you're trying to minimize the employer's fear of rejection. So if you don't want the employer to feel, for example, that the the employer will feel it to some extent they have the upper hand, and the more employer trying to and talking to a more prestigious employer also than the one you're working at will make the employer feel like you're trying to move up. There's something interesting that I've noticed. I remember one year I wrote down all the placements that I made and how I'd spoken to law firms during the course of those placements and the things that happened. And one thing that was very interesting to me was I remembered that in every case the attorney I placed and got offers for, I was able to portray whatever the candidate was trying to do, whether it was to move to a smaller firm or a larger firm, that for whatever reason, that was a move up for the candidate, meaning this was something that was just clicking for their career goals. Even if they were going to a smaller firm, making less money, that was a move up. Or if they were going from a smaller firm to a large firm, that was a move up. People like to hear that. And it's in the United States and it's very in Europe and stuff. People didn't used to be able to move up and work outside of their social class or their profession. But in the US, a lot of people moved here just to get away from that and England and everything the way it used to be. But in the US, people are respected who are trying to move up and everyone, it's just part of the culture. And even in the United States, it's interesting. You, First immigrants came to New York and then people couldn't get ahead there. So then they moved farther and farther west until they got to California, which was like their last chance. Or they go to Florida. But anyway, so people in this country respect people that are trying to move up and improve their lot. And it's not like that as much in a lot of other countries. And most people in the US are immigrants, obviously. And so if you're tell your interviewer and you're interviewing with less prestigious employers, you may have a problem because they may think, oh, this person can't get an interview with better employers. There's something wrong that we're missing. So that case, the way you approach it is just say something along the lines of, if you're getting interviews with three firms and you say, I'm trying to get a job for whatever reason, and I've only been applying to openings, and those other two firms had openings in the third, that's okay. So that there's nothing wrong with that. And the employer is going to believe, you're just applying because there's openings and trying to find more out. And even if you're did apply to more prestigious employers and haven't heard back or rejected, you just need to make the employer feel that you're one of the only places they're applying to, if that's possible. They're more prestigious. And again, if you're applying to less prestigious employers that pay less, it's then your goal would be to tell the prestigious firm that money's not a concern for you and you're just trying to find the right environment and the right fit. And so being able to do that and putting yourself in that kind of position is also going to help you. So you try to characterize things that way. And people get creative. One of the most things you can do when all your interviews are with less prestigious firms is you need to basically convince them that you're very interested in them, you're trying to move up, you're trying to get into a better firm or get work that's more sophisticated or work with larger clients and that helps. And then the other one is that if you're interviewing with a mix of more prestigious and less prestigious firms, so here this is much more of a normal occurrence and what happens. And again, sometimes people only get one interview, but in most cases, people may have multiple interviews. And so you may be speaking with more prestigious and less prestigious. And so here, you don't need to make as much of a compelling case. You can still leave every employer with the impression that you're their first choice and giving them that basis of understanding. So assuming you've given the impression to an employer that they're their first choice, then they should also understand why you're speaking to so many employers and why you're doing a broad search. And then the employer, if you make them aware of that, the best thing to do is to basically tell people that they're give the impression there may be something wrong in your current employer situation, but you want to get this next move right. So you're trying to talk to a lot of people so you don't make the same mistake again. Employers don't like it when people say bad things, so you need to be careful. But you basically want to tell people that you're trying to find your next home. You need to project that you're leaving your current employer for you're trying to grow. And that's another just quick point I'll just give you as an aside is that anytime you're looking for a new job, you typically want people often to feel like you've outgrown whatever they have, or you're trying to grow, or you can't grow where you're at. So, what would be some examples of not being able to grow where you're at? So, one very common example is if you're working in a major law firm and you find out that in order to succeed there, you're going to need to bring in business, and you realize that maybe that's not something that's going to be realistic for you because of the size clients you would need to bring in at that firm, then it may make sense for you at some point to leave because you know that's never going to happen. You're never going to advance. And so that would be one reason to move to a smaller firm, for example. Or you're at a smaller firm and you realize that you're never, because of the size firm you're at and the sophistication of the work, you're never going to get the chance to represent public companies and large companies. And because of that, you want to move to a larger firm. So that would be growth. So any type of move you're doing, the employer needs to believe that there's growth involved for you. And if they think that there's growth involved and they offer something, they're much more likely to make you an offer than if the opposite were true. And upward momentum can be moving to smaller firms, it can be moving to larger firms, but you always need to portray yourself as having joined whatever your current employer is. You joined that employer and there was the growth and the reasons that you moved there, and that's what happened. And then they will hopefully understand that's why you're moving again. I hope that makes sense. There's one classic example that I remember from years ago. I was talking to this attorney, and he'd been in, I don't remember where he was. He was in New York, I think, and he'd failed the bar. And so he didn't get first of all, he didn't get a job after doing a summer associate job. And then he got a job because that didn't happen. He ended up getting a job in a small firm in New York. He'd gone to a good law school like NYU or something. And so he got a job in a small law firm in New York after passing the bar, which basically was, I don't know, not a year later, but pretty close to it after he graduated from law school. But then he went there and he realized he said, I'm going to work as hard as I possibly can. And he started off at a small firm and then he just put everything he had into it. And he realized how he could do better and how he was limited there. And he went to a better firm and a better firm. And pretty soon he was at one of the top firms in the country. And then I think he became a partner there. That can happen. So a lot of times people will just start out very small and then they'll move into better and better firms, which is cool. And then other times people will move to smaller firms. And when they move to smaller firms, they will become incredibly successful. But every move you do many times there has to be reasons for it. And it needs to be something related to you growing. And that's really the most important thing. And employers need to believe that. And so they need to believe that for whatever reason, you're being limited for some extent. Your current employer could limit you because you can't bring in business there. Your current employer could limit you because the business you can bring in is too small. Your current employer could limit you because they won't let you work on certain types of matters. Your current employer could limit you because I don't know, the way the management of the firm, or the fact that the firm only has one office and isn't national, or the fact that the firm doesn't have multiple practice areas where you can refer back work to, and it's only one practice area. The firm could limit you to all the partners are retiring. You're the only associate, and then everything was a part. There's so many things that you can find with any employer that are limiting you, and you should be very good at that. And so if you are able to show employers that they're somehow limiting you and you're able whatever you're trying to do, you're being limited, then people like to hear that. So ask yourself, like, how am I being limited at my existing firm? And then how does, almost like a puzzle, like how would that new firm not limit me? And if you're able to do that effectively, it really goes a long way. And so again, if you were in charge of hiring someone, you have to decide who you want. Would you want to hire someone that had compelling personal reasons related to their growth to work for you? Or would you want to hire someone who, I'm sorry, without compelling reasons, or someone who really needs what you offer to grow? And very important. So I use this kind of example a lot in these webinars, but if you were hiring, say, a nanny to take care of your child, you would have, let's say you had two choices. And let's say, just not to be a downer here, but maybe one of your children had some sort of disability. Maybe they were, I don't know, maybe they were deaf. I'm just it's sad, but maybe one of your children was deaf. And so you had two nannies applying. You had one that had studied how to work with hearing impaired children in college, and which was 5 years ago, and she'd been trying to get jobs doing that, and she was currently working with a family that didn't have a hearing impaired child, and then you had another nanny to choose from that was just a regular nanny that had nothing special in her background. So the one that was very interested and had studied how to work with hearing impaired children in college and had always been interested in that would be the one that I hope most rational people would want to hire because that person is very interested in what you offer. So you need to think about that. This is how employers think when they're interviewing people. Who has the biggest reasons for wanting to work here? Who really wants what we have? And that's who people hire. So you have to really think about that. And if somebody needs something, people want to feel good about themselves by helping people. Like they want to feel that they're helping someone reach their goals and they're doing the right thing and they're helping someone get to where they want to go and they're meeting and so someone and then hiring someone that needs some organization like yours. If you had this deaf child, hiring a nanny that really wants to work with deaf children and that's something that they need is much better for you than the opposite. And so people want to feel like they're giving people the opportunity to succeed. And so you need to give employers really good reasons for hiring you. And then you need to position yourself as someone where whatever they're offering you is upper mobility. And it makes you sound like a winner, not a loser. So you're not interviewing at this whatever this firm is because of reasons that or just that's all you can get. It's got to be something that makes them feel good. And people want to feel people that want to be there, that are winning by going there and not losing by going there. So I hope excuse me, most of what I covered today so far is helpful. I just want you to understand that when you're looking for a job, having compelling reasons for looking for a job and wanting to work where you're talking to and making people feel that if you go there, you're going to stay. And if you go there, they're giving you what you can't get otherwise is incredibly important because that's who ultimately usually gets chosen and that's who stays. And any organization, the best organizations only survive if people are sticking around there. And again, when people ask about other interviews, you have to understand how you phrase it and how you position it. And you have to understand what the employer is going to think when you do that. And it's something that you have to be very careful about how you answer. And an employer needs to believe that you really want to work there. And so you have to be extremely careful. I had an interview once, and I was stupid. I don't know what I was thinking, but when I first came out to Los Angeles, I was interviewing with firms. I'd done mass mailings and sent out all these letters and to law firms trying to get interviews, and it worked. And so I went out to some interviews, and I remember I went interview with some big firms, and then I got an interview with a small firm. It was like maybe 10 people. And I went in the interview, and these were good attorneys in this 10-person firm. I might not have been 10, I was like seven. I mean, they were from top law schools and had good qualifications and like there was nothing wrong with these attorneys. They were solid. But I went in and my first interview was with this guy and he was like maybe a couple years older than me. And he asked me like where else I was interviewing and I told him and he immediately just came out and said, this is not the place for you because we only want to be with people working here that want to be at a smaller firm and we're only talking to firms like this. So you need to be careful. I didn't answer that in the correct way. I should have said, I'm trying to get a job, but this is really the kind of place I want to work at. And I applied to these firms, but it's obviously not what I want and talked about the hours and all this stuff to try to, and I want to get more responsibility and all these things I should have said, but I didn't. And you have to be very careful. And people, again, want to work with people that want to be there. And they also want to feel good about hiring you and that making a decision that's good for the people that are in the firm. Okay, so we'll take a quick break, and when I come back, we'll answer questions. I'll answer questions about not just about what I talked about today, but any questions you have about your career. And I'll be back in just like a minute or two. Thanks. All right, let's get the question. Give me 1 second here. 1 second. In here, try to zoom. All right, give me a second here. Questions. All right, let me make sure. So if you're not logged in, if you're logged into Zoom, I won't show your name. So I just want people to know that. So I just try to be careful about that. These are the questions. When is the right time to tell a law firm I'm interviewing elsewhere without damaging my candidacy? You actually don't necessarily want to tell that to people at any point in the interview unless you have to. Sometimes, if you do have other interviews or you have other offers, it's a good idea to tell the law firm that to maybe speed up getting the law firm you're speaking with to speed things up if you do have other offers. But typically, you don't want to talk about other interviews. You tell people you're interviewing elsewhere unless it comes up. You just need to be very careful. It doesn't really do you any good to do that in most cases. Okay, how do I change my legal practice area as a lawyer without losing seniority or long-term career momentum? Okay, so changing your practice area is a good point. There's different types of practice area changes you can make. Moving between different transactional practice areas is usually much easier. Certainly moving from corporate to real estate would be a big move, or moving from corporate to patent prosecution be a big move. But if you are in litigation, there's all sorts of different types of litigation. And in terms of transactional law, there's also a ton of different types of transactional related work. But if you change your practice area, if you're moving from a transactional practice area, which is again, corporate, real estate, and that sort of thing, and you're trying to go into a litigation, that can be very difficult. And the same thing goes for vice versa. Typically, if you're trying to change your practice area, it can end up, it can hurt you. It's not always the easiest thing to do. And people do it. People do it at every stage of their career. But you have to think about why you're doing it and what are the benefits of it. An example would be you might be like a litigator in a huge law firm and just doing commercial litigation on behalf of companies, and you may decide that you want to change your practice area to do something else. So that's very common for commercial litigators. They can do anything. They can do mass torts plaintiffs work, or they can learn how to do environmental work or different types of litigation. So litigators can always learn different types of litigation. And many times corporate attorneys can pick up all sorts of different types of transaction related work too. I had a funny experience. I was someone who referred to me to talk to, I don't even know what it was about, but this was maybe 10 or 15 years ago, and might even, yeah, probably 10 or 15 years ago. And it was someone that had been an early partner at Davis Polk. And at the point I was talking to this guy, he must have been like 85. And he was telling me, and I thought it was very funny, that back when he started, when he was working at Davis Polk, like he would be doing, and I don't even know when this must have been. This is probably in the 1950s, 60s. But he said that people at Davis Polk back then, the attorneys wouldn't necessarily be specialists. They would do corporate, and some of them they would do litigation. The same attorney would be doing that. Have all these different files, like a corporate file, and they'd have a litigation file, and a bunch of them. And I thought that was funny. And then one of the solo practitioners in smaller markets will often do anything, any type of work that you have, they'll do. And you also have that. So anyway, so I guess my point to you is that you can always change your practice area. Attorneys used to be generalists for the most part, not specialists. But in changing your practice area, it can be a good move, but it makes it much more difficult for law firms to hire you if you change in your practice area, because almost all law firms hire specialists, and so they hire people that are a specialist in a given practice area. If a law firm has an opening for a real estate leasing attorney, it's going to hire a real estate leasing attorney. It's not going to hire someone that wants to switch over from litigation or corporate. Or it's if it can't find a leasing attorney that does only leasing, it'll hire a real estate generalist that does real estate commercial sales and leases too. So most people want specialists, and so that's something to always keep in mind if you're looking for a position. Okay, is it okay to mention another summer associate offer to a law firm I prefer? And if so, how do I do it strategically? No, there's no reason to tell a law firm that about another summer that you have offer at another firm. There's no reason you would want to do that. Just not even strategically. It just if they like you, they'll make you an offer. They're not going to ask you about other offers, and bringing up other offers doesn't necessarily help you because they may think, wow, does this person have many other summer associate offers, or do they just have one? It's just there's no benefit to you to doing that. People want to feel that that's just I don't there's no benefit unless you have to do it. But I don't think it ever comes up in the context of being a summer associate. What are the risks and benefits when an attorney discloses competing job offers before we extend ours? I'm assuming, oh, what are the risks and benefits for the attorney doing that to you? In most cases, you'll have an understanding after talking to the person whether or not they're likely to accept your offers based on the ones that they've disclosed. So if you feel like they're going to be more likely to accept your offer than theirs, then that's okay. But if you feel like there's reasons probably that they would prefer to be at these other firms than yours, then that should give you an indication about that. So what does that mean? Say an attorney is a expert in doing oil and gas title opinions. It's literally a branch of law, and they've got an offer from a firm that does nothing but oil and gas title opinions, is considered the best in the country. And then your firm does some oil and gas title opinions, but they're not going to be able to do all oil and gas title opinions. Your work is inconsistent, but you have this other type of work. Obviously, the person's probably going to be more likely to go to the other firm. So I guess what I would say to you in that case is you just, if it was me and I was a firm, I would not give them an offer. So that can be very helpful. And yeah, learning about that could help or it could hurt. It could be the opposite, hurt or help. Okay, how does partnership track work at law firms and what does it really take to make partner? All law firms have different types of partners, and some of them will have income partners, which means that the person just receives a salary. Others will have partners that are called equity partners, where they own part of the firm and they receive a percentage of the profits. And so how does it work at most firms? So in general, it doesn't matter in general, law firms will make people a partner only when they have to. Meaning, when do they have to? They typically have to when that attorney is generating an incredible amount of money for the firm. And if they don't make them a partner, they're going to lose money. So they want to make sure that they make offers to people where they have to make them a partner. So that's the general rule at most firms. So regardless of the size firms will make people partner when they feel like they have to, not because you want to be partner, because they have to. So a lot of times it has to do with how much business you have. It may have to do with how hard you work. It may do the fact that there's some partner that has an incredible amount of business that it basically is saying, make this person a partner, and they'll do it because of that. And there's all sorts of reasons that a law firm will. But generally, you just think about, do they have to? There are all sorts of partnership tracks. Some small firms, very small firms in rural markets may consider a person a partner after a couple of years out of law school. Major markets could be 15 years. It just depends on the firm size. It depends on the firm. It depends on how old the firm is, meaning more established firms typically will have longer and longer partnership tracks. Less established firms may have a much shorter partnership tracks. So it's just, there's no explanation really for what these tracks are at different size firms. But again, just keeping in mind, does this firm have to make me partner? Why do they have to make me partner? And so if they're going to have to make you partner, then you're going to have to offer some huge benefit that they can't get that they can't get just by hiring somebody. You have to be able to provide something of major value to the firm. And if you can't do that, then it becomes very difficult for a law firm to justify making you a partner. Because why would they if they can just hire just an employee to do that? What question should I ask in a law firm lateral interview to stand out and evaluate the right fit? The best questions to, first of all, when you're when a firm is interviewing you, I guess you are interviewing them, but you're allowing people to talk and you're trying to get an understanding of what is most important to that firm and what's most important to their hiring and what all these sorts of questions. So you're trying to understand what are they looking for and that sort of thing. But the I think the most important way to stand out in an interview and what type of questions to ask, in my opinion, like the most important ones are, is you ask the law firm what you ask them what whoever you're talking to, what could I do to really make your job easier if I were to start here? And what is it that you're looking for? What would like my first 60, 90 days like look like? How could I really do a good job here? What would make me like the best associate you've ever hired? Things like that, like things that show that you really want to work hard and you really want to do a good job. And that's actually the biggest thing that people can ask. Most people do not ask what they can do to make your job easier. Most people do not ask the employer what they could do to be the best possible hire. They just don't ask those questions. And because they don't ask those questions, most people don't get jobs. There was a funny story. So I've been teaching that particular thing for years. That's what attorneys need to ask in law firm interviews. But then I saw something interesting. I think it was an article I read on Medium by this guy he did marketing or something, and he would go into interviews and he would meet with clients and he would pull out a spreadsheet, not a spreadsheet, a slide deck, like I showed a slide deck, and he would just give this presentation to people about the slide deck. And then at the end, he would say, do you have any questions? And he was basically talking about all his marketing expertise. So he did that. He found that when he did those things, he got 10% of the people to hire him or something like that. And then he changed his tune and he figured out, I don't know how, he read somewhere maybe, or he decided to he had a slide deck, but he didn't show it. And he just went in and he said, what is it you're looking for? How could I help you? What would be like the biggest win you're looking for in this? And he just started asking questions like that. And what hadn't other people done for you before that you needed done, or why does this need exist, and all this sort of stuff. So you start asking like, what does the person hiring him need? And then he went from getting like 1 out of 10 to 8 out of 10. So usually in a law firm lateral interview, like the most important thing you can do is to ask the law firm, like what, and the people you're talking to, what can I do to help you? What does this need exist? What would make me a really good hire? And those sorts of questions. And very few people ask that. And so very few people ask it, and very few people get the sort of positions they're capable of because they just think in terms of what they need. They think in terms of what is my salary? Am I going to get the kind of work that I deserve and all this sort of stuff, which is just absolutely insane. And I thought like that too when I was an associate. I don't know what I was thinking. Just thinking back on it, it's embarrassing. And that's how a lot of people think. What can these people do for me? As opposed to what can I do for these people? Because if you frame things as what can I do for these people, then you're going to be tremendously more successful than if you just are interested in what they can do for you. Okay, what are the best questions to ask during an OCI or callback interview to stand out with law firms? Okay, so OCI is when you do OCI, a lot of times I think that the law firms are literally just looking at you, they're asking a few questions, and they're seeing if they're comfortable with you and if you look like someone that might do there. And honestly, they're not looking for like a ton. It's basically, I've always thought that OCI interviews and screening interviews are just like, are we comfortable with this person? Seem okay? So when you go into any type of OCI interview or screening interview, you need to come across as likable and competent, and that's pretty much it. Likable and competent, and hopefully you've got some questions about the firm and but you are people you connect with people. So those are the most important things. And then I would say just in your callback interviews, it's important to ask what are the characteristics of the people that do well here, those sorts of things. Not questions not related to anytime you ask questions about related to what the employer can do for you, those sorts of things, they come across as very disingenuous, and people don't like that. People like to hear the opposite, like you asking questions about what you can do for the employer. And so that's important. So sometimes people go into OCI or call back and they'll ask about whether or not they would get to do certain types of work and things if they were there. And in reality, that's just not a good idea because any employer is going to give you the type of work that they want to give you that they're hiring for. You could go to interview with a major US law firm and they may have tax and real estate and corporate and litigation and all these different practice areas, but you show up there in the summer and you get some assignments and they just put you, you could might not even have any interest in tax. You might be put into a tax job. Your job in a callback and OCI many times is just to be likable, to seem competent, like you're going to work hard. And those are the main things, and that you're interested in the firm, you're enthusiastic. And because they don't expect you to be like an expert in interviewing or anything, they just expect you to be enthusiastic and someone that will be manageable. And so manageability is actually an important thing. I should have written that down. Manageable. Manageability means that you'll basically, if people give you things to do or tell you what to do, you'll do it. And sometimes people aren't manageable, meaning they have all these opinions about what they should be doing and how they should do it. And it's okay for you to have that. But if you're working for someone else, you need to realize you need to be manageable. And a lot of times attorneys don't succeed at all working for other people because they're not manageable. So manageability is very important. How can our law firm determine whether a candidate at mentioning in interviews is demonstrating transparency or attempting to create leverage? Yeah, so if someone's trying to create leverage with you, that's probably not a good idea for you to hire them. So that's a very unattractive trait for an attorney to do with law firms during interviews. So yeah, if someone's trying to create leverage with you, maybe it's not a good idea to hire them. I'd just throw that out there. Or create leverage or transparency. So if a candidate's in mentioning other interviews, again, they shouldn't be mentioning other interviews. That doesn't help. So if they're mentioning other interviews, then yeah, then that's not something you need to be, then that's not a good thing, I guess I'm saying. Yeah, they shouldn't be mentioning other interviews unless they're explicitly asked. But if they're mentioning other interviews, if I was a law firm, I would be turned off by that. And because there's no reason for them to do that. And if they're trying to create leverage, that's also not good. Yeah. Okay, how do you navigate that? You have the big name schools or firms. Let me see. How do you navigate the opposite situation when you don't have big names, schools, or firms on your resume, but you're interested in big law because of your experience and career goals? Yes, and I hope I brought this up, and I probably didn't directly, but large law firms love hiring people that didn't start out in the biggest firms and often didn't go to the biggest law schools, but became an expert in a practice area. And large law firms love hiring people often that don't have the best pedigrees and the best schools because those people will come in and they'll work much harder often and they'll stick around and they won't be jaded as other people that may have started out in the largest law firms out of law school. It's actually can be help you into getting into top law firms sometimes if you don't have the best schools and the best firms on your resume. But so that can help you. But at the same time, you have to look at things from the point of view of a law firm. So what I'm going to say right now is not necessarily the nicest thing and it sucks, but I'm just going to be completely honest. So there's a couple of different things. So you have law firm clients. So law firm clients, like large firms, we have law firm clients and employees and attorneys. So law firm clients want to see the best attorneys possible. Meaning, if you're like a general counsel, you're going to feel very good if your attorneys are at the law firm attorneys are from top law schools, right? Top law attorneys are from top law schools that are working for you, right? That makes you look good as a general counsel and you feel like you hired competent attorneys. If you're a lawyer in a law firm, so a lawyer in a law firm, lawyer in a law firm. Oh, sorry. You're going to feel good if the other attorneys are from top law schools. from top firms and law schools. Okay. And then if you're a partner, you're going to feel good if people you hire were trained at top law schools, at top law firms. Because the training you get at a top law firm is often because you're working for on behalf of major U.S. major businesses and things. The training is going to be different than you might get than you would necessarily get at probably a smaller firm. Meaning, the attorneys working on things are going to be able to go into more detail because clients pay more money to have more larger budgets at larger firms. And so these are the things. So if you didn't go to a top law school, I don't like saying this, and you certainly are marketable if you have expertise in a practice area, meaning you have very good training in your practice area. So that's good. And then hopefully it's a practice area and you're in a discrete practice area, like your corporate M&A versus corporate generalist, for example, practice area. That's important. And then the other thing is through the training and being motivated to work in a major law firm. A lot of times, so people that come in that don't necessarily have the best schools and things will and don't have the best training will work harder and be more motivated and more likely to stick around many times and work harder and try their hardest and put in extra effort and all these things. So it's very attractive if you were a partner because you want to have people that are just going all out and doing your best and giving you a lot of respect and all that sort of stuff. So people can go to work in big law, but at the same time, you have to realize what you're up against. And what you're up against is that the clients that the law firm is hired, the the clients that hire the law firm are going to be usually general counsels and things. So they're going to want to see the best roster possible of the people working on their matters. They're going to like it if they have better schools and things on their resume. The lawyers in the law firm, if you go to a major US law firm, are going to probably have gone to the best law schools. And so they're going to want to see other people and work with other people that also went to those kind of schools. It doesn't mean that that's the be all end all, and it certainly isn't, but that they're going to like that. And then partners in the law firm are going to feel good by having people work on their matters that may not need a lot of training because they've been trained at similar caliber of firms. And if you're trained inside of a major law firm, you learn how to look at matters in a lot of depth and things you may not get the same training in a smaller law firm. How do you protect your reputation during interviews when recruiters operate an overlapping network and share opinions about candidates? So I've heard about that happening. There is an overlapping network sometimes of recruiting personnel inside of law firms. I don't think it's as common as you think. I don't think that they're necessarily sharing information about candidates together. I've heard of this happening, but I've only encountered, and I've hired to work here at BCG. We've had several people working here in the past that have been recruiting coordinators and things at law firms. And when we hired them, and I'd never heard about that by anybody that I've ever hired. And I'd hired people that had worked at their previous firm for 20 years as recruiting coordinators. So I don't think it's as common as you think it is. But it does happen because I did remember one example that I encountered, but I don't think it's as common as you think. I don't think it happens very often. I think it may happen. Yeah, it happens, but I've only heard about that happening once. What is the safest way to answer, are you interviewing Soros? Yes, I have an interview or I have a couple interviews, whatever. That's usually the best way to answer it. And then though they may ask you where, and then if they ask you where, you could tell them if they need to know. But even if I was doing that, I would say I'm interviewing a couple places, but I like what you guys are offering better because of this and this and come from this thing that way. Okay, how do I prepare a strong legal writing sample for law firm job applications? So most of the time, the applications do not require a writing sample. In this day and age, like with AI and things, I think it's fairly easy to create without too much difficulty to fix all of your legal writing, putting it into whatever AI program you use and making sure things are grammatically correct, that the sentences are very top, very good and fixing things. I don't know that it used to be that people would spend days. I remember when I once wrote a law review article, I spent at least a week just like going through it again and again and marking it up and fixing paragraphs and language and citations and all that sort of stuff. It's not as hard as it used to be, but it depends on what kind of writing sample they want. In most cases, if you're doing a writing sample, the easiest thing to do is prepare, give them copies of briefs and things you may have written that are public. Let me just make sure I don't have anything else. And then give me 1 second here. I'm a little tired. I got up at 4. Let's see here. Let's see. Okay, this next question for, okay, oh, I can just do this. This will be easy. Okay, for junior attorneys with 0 to 2 years of experience who didn't follow traditional big law pipeline or had slower start earlier in their careers but are now licensed and motivated, where are you seeing successful placements and what tends to convince firms to take a chance on those candidates? Are there patterns you notice from the ones who break in successfully? Let me just hear. Okay, so I'm assuming you're trying to break into big law again. So the last person, how do people do that and break in? You have to typically, if that's really what your goal is, people that break into larger firms typically will have very good training in a discrete practice area, meaning they will have been trained in whatever, like corporate M&A or a certain type of patent prosecution. Maybe they do, I don't know, chemical polymers or something, patent project, they'll have some sort of training in a very discrete practice area because law firms hire specialists, not generalists. So that's the first thing. So anybody that wants to work in a major law firm as a lateral is typically going to need some sort of training in a very discrete practice area. And you're going to need, and if you are trained in a discrete practice area, then that's the first step. But the next step is like, how long is your training? If you spent 2 years not working in a smaller law firm, was that training in a very discrete practice area? And if it wasn't, then you need to get that sort of training. So you could learn, for example, you might want to be a real estate attorney. So you would have get exposure to commercial transactions. That's one way to do it. So people that get jobs in large law firms later in their careers or after like a slow start will typically be get very good training in a practice area and then maybe move to a couple larger firms and then they'll be at the right place at the right time. So you're only going to get into a top law firm when you're the best applicant for the position that they have. And you're typically not going to be the best applicant if you got off to a slow start. In 2 years, it may take you 5 years or 6 years. And then how discrete is your practice area? So an example might be like someone gets training in executive compensation, which is a practice area, and they get training at a small firm in maybe they're in New York at a small firm doing it, but they want to work at a big law firm. And then maybe there's a job opening that comes up in Nashville for an executive compensation attorney in Nashville. And people in the law firm in Nashville isn't getting any applicants because there's no one in Nashville that does executive compensation. Or maybe there's two attorneys. And so you see that opening at the big law firm in Nashville, and you've gotten some really good training at a small firm doing executive compensation, and then you try to get a job with that firm, and they don't really have any other good applicants that want to move to Nashville and do that, then you're in pretty good shape. So that's how those moves tend to happen. People are just in the right place at the right time, and they're the best applicant. And so that's just usually the best way of being able to do that. Or maybe you're in a small market where there's some big firms. There's some decent sized firms in Omaha. You wouldn't think, but there are. And you start out in a smaller firm in Omaha and you get training. And then when firms there have openings for laterals, then you could be the best applicant. So the thing to remember is in any practice area, let's just get back to real estate. It's real estate, commercial. And let's say you're in, what's a good market here? St. Louis. St. Louis. So you have these different people, how many years they are at a law school doing commercial real estate. Okay, 7, 8. So let's say in year one, I've given this example before, and things there might be 7 to 8. This is not, maybe let's just say 15. So year one, you're 13, 8, 10. These are people still doing the work in that cross level. Then you get down to maybe 7, 3, or 3, people going in-house, 2, etc. So right when you're out of school, there's all these people doing it, right? Commercial real estate. And these are all the people doing it. But when it gets down to 5 years out of law school, if they're looking for a fifth year or a sixth year, for example, or fifth, let's call that sixth, they're looking for a fifth or sixth year. Now you only have 5 people that they could possibly hire, as opposed to they were looking for a first or second, they have 28, or a third, 38. So the benefit, your win, the way people get into larger firms that didn't necessarily go to the top law school is they're able to stick with a practice area long enough, and then they become experts. And then by the time a law firm's needing a lateral at a certain level, there's not any applicants. And so I'm talking about these are the people that are left. So that's left. And so you have people left in these class areas because people do all sorts of things. They move, they go in house, they go to the government. So these are only people left. And out of those, maybe zero looking for jobs, right? Zero looking for jobs. And then here you have 2 left, you have maybe 1. From the fifth to sixth year, when they have an opening, there's only 1 person. So that's how people win, is they become the only applicant after a certain length of time. Let's see. Okay, is it okay in an interview to ask what kind of training or support will be provided to bring you up to speed and or to help you in your career at the firm? I think this may convey you want to stay at the firm long term. So training is, yes, you can ask about training if you like. And I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with that question. The problem with questions about training is a lot of times attorneys are just expected to figure things out. And so law firms do like to talk about training. But if you think about your traditional attorney, a lot of times you just have to figure things out kind of when you're on the job. And asking about training might give the firm the impression that that you're going to be dependent on them to train you and you're not going to be able to figure things out on your own. So most attorneys figure things out by osmosis. Anything that shows the law firm a lack of potential initiative and things and ability to figure things out and get things done on their own is can often be something that is sometimes not taken the right way. Partners in law firms, a lot of times they don't want to do training. They want people to figure things out. They want to work on their stuff and not have to worry about you. And those are just the way that I would think about it. I think asking about training is, again, that goes back to one of the questions of what can this employer do for me? So anytime you ask questions in an interview about what can this employer do for me, whether it's bonuses, health insurance, paternity leave, whatever you're asking about when you're asking about what can this employer do for me, that doesn't help you as much as asking questions about what can I do for this employer. So you ask people what you can do for them. All right, thanks everyone for being on this webinar. This was, again, like a fairly short one, but I like this topic. It's important. And hopefully this will help you with your interview skills. And I will see everyone again next week. Thanks. Have a good rest of your week.